Zyx'thor had 3 eyes, 2 arms, and skin the color of deep ocean waters on planets he'd never visit. His kind, the Valkyrie, were known across 17 star systems for 3 things: their exceptional memory, their terrible singing voices, and their unusual metabolism that allowed them to digest almost anything organic. That last trait made Zyx'thor perfectly suited for his chosen profession, though his parents had hoped he'd become a stellar cartographer like his father. Instead, he baked bread. His bakery occupied a cramped corner of Station Calyx 9, a trading post that floated in the neutral zone between 3 warring empires. The station itself was a hodgepodge of salvaged ships welded together over centuries, creating a maze of corridors that smelled of ozone, recycled air, and, if you were lucky, fresh food. Zyx'thor's shop, marked by a hand-painted sign reading "The Cosmic Loath," was squeezed between a weapons dealer and a memory modification clinic. Every morning, station time, Zyx'thor would arrive at his shop, fire up his thermal oven, and begin the day's work. He made bread from dozens of worlds: Terran sourdough using bacteria from Earth's San Francisco, Kryn flatbread that crackled with static electricity, phosphor rolls that glowed faintly in the dark, and his specialty, umbral wheat bread, made from grain that grew only on the twin-sunned world of Umbria. It was a Tuesday by Earth's old calendar, though that meant nothing in the station's perpetual artificial cycle. Zyx'thor was kneading dough when merchant Tholbex entered the shop. Tholbex was a regular customer, a Greenix trader with skin like green velvet and 4 arms that made him excellent at juggling both merchandise and lies. He came every 3rd day for a loaf of Zyx'thor's umbral bread, claiming it reminded him of his childhood, though Zyx'thor suspected Greenix didn't even have childhoods in the traditional sense. But today, something was wrong. Tholbex walked through the door, and Zyx'thor's middle eye, the one that saw in spectrums others couldn't, noticed it immediately. The merchant had no shadow. The shop's lighting came from 3 directions, the standard anti-smuggling setup required by station authorities. Every customer who entered cast multiple shadows, a crosshatch of darkness that made everyone look more dramatic than they deserved. But Tholbex stood in the light, and where his shadows should have been, there was nothing, just floor, just light. "The usual," Tholbex said, but his voice carried a tremor that wasn't there before. Zyx'thor's hand stopped kneading. His 3 eyes focused on the merchant, scanning, analyzing. "Tholbex, your shadow." "I know." Tholbex's 4 arms hung limply at his sides. "It started 3 days ago. First, the edges got fuzzy. Then it began to fade. This morning, I woke up and it was completely gone." "Have you seen a doctor?" Tholbex laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I've seen 7. They have no idea what's causing it. Neither does anyone else." He leaned closer, and Zyx'thor could smell fear on him, sharp and acrid. "But I know what it means. My grandfather, he lost his shadow when I was young. 2 weeks later, he started to fade. First his colors dulled, then his edges got blurry. Then one morning he was just gone. Not dead, not vanished, just erased, like he'd never existed at all." Zyx'thor's dual hearts beat faster. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Tholbex pulled out a data pad and slid it across the counter. "Look at the feeds. It's happening everywhere." The baker's fingers, still dusted with flour, scrolled through the news. Reports from across the galaxy, thousands of cases, beings of every species losing their shadows, then slowly fading from existence. The medical community was baffled. Religious leaders called it divine judgment. Scientists proposed theories ranging from quantum decay to dimensional bleeding. Everyone agreed on one thing: they had no solution. "Why are you telling me this?" Zyx'thor asked. Tholbex straightened up, all 4 arms spreading in a gesture of desperate hope.
"Because I've been coming to your shop for 2 years. I've been eating your bread almost daily, and in all that time, I haven't missed a single day in the past month." His primary eyes locked onto Zyx'thor's. "I've been tracking the data. Everyone who's lost their shadow stopped eating certain foods about 3 to 4 weeks before the symptoms appeared. But there's a pattern in who's not getting sick." "What pattern?" "They're all eating specific things, things prepared in specific ways. And your bread, Zyx'thor, your umbral wheat bread, it's on that list." Zyx'thor's third eye blinked slowly. "You're saying my bread is protecting people?" "I'm saying you might be one of the few who knows how to bake it properly. The question is, why?"
After Tholbex left with his loaf, Zyx'thor closed the shop early. He stood in his kitchen, staring at the ingredients he'd used for years without question. Umbral wheat. He'd been buying it from the same supplier, a quiet Vraxi merchant who made monthly deliveries. The grain was expensive, difficult to grow, requiring the precise light conditions of Umbria's twin suns. Most bakers considered it too much trouble. But Zyx'thor's master, old Corveth, had taught him the recipe when he was still an apprentice. The old Velkari had been particular about every detail. The grain had to be ground at a specific speed. The water had to be exactly 23.7 degrees. The dough needed to rest for precisely 4 hours. And the baking was the strangest part. "Never use a standard oven," Corveth had said, his voice raspy with age. "Umbral bread requires full-spectrum light. Heat alone will not suffice." Zyx'thor had installed special UV emitters in his oven at great expense. Most customers couldn't even tell the difference, but he'd maintained the tradition because Corveth had insisted it mattered. Now, standing in his kitchen, Zyx'thor wondered if his old master had known something. He pulled up his communication terminal and sent a message to his grain supplier. Then he began researching, his 3 eyes scanning multiple screens simultaneously, a Velkari trait that made him excellent at multitasking. The data was scattered, but it was there. Reports of other foods providing protection, a type of algae cake from the Viridian depths, crystallized fruits from the shatter moons, fungal steaks from the dark gardens of Nex. All of them required specific preparation methods. All of them involved unusual light exposure during cooking. By the time his supplier responded 8 hours later, Zyx'thor had formed a theory. When the holographic display flickered to life, he barely let Vraxi finish her greeting. "The wheat," he said. "Where exactly on Umbria does it grow?" The Vraxi, a crystalline being named Shixa, tilted her faceted head. "The Meridian Fields, same as always. Why?" "The Meridian Fields are in the Terminator Zone, aren't they, where both suns hit simultaneously?" "Yes, it's the only place the wheat grows. The dual sun exposure creates some kind of mutation in the grain structure, makes it harder, denser." Shixa paused. "Zyx'thor, what is this about?" "I need you to get me as much information as you can about Umbria, history, geology, anything unusual about the planet. That's going to take time. We don't have time." 3 days later, Zyx'thor was aboard the cargo hauler Distant Prayer, bound for Umbria. He'd closed his shop, packed what he could, and spent most of his savings on passage. The decision was both impulsive and terrifying. The ship was old, its hull patched with so many different metals it looked like a quilt. The crew was small, just Captain Zyx'thor, a 6-armed Kylathi who'd lost 2 limbs in some undiscussed incident, and her engineer, a human woman named Santos, who spoke rarely and smiled less. Zyx'thor spent most of the 3-week journey in the cargo hold, where he'd set up a makeshift laboratory. He'd brought samples of his ingredients, portable analysis equipment bought second-hand, and every data file he could find about the Shadow Plague. Because that's what people were calling it now, the Shadow Plague. The numbers were getting worse. Millions had lost their shadows. Thousands were fading daily. Panic was spreading faster than the plague itself.
Some colonies had instituted quarantines, though no one understood what they were quarantining against. Others blamed specific species, specific technologies, specific gods. Zyx'thor worked through the nights, analyzing his wheat samples under different light spectrums. He discovered something fascinating. The grain absorbed and stored light in ways that shouldn't be possible. When exposed to the dual sun radiation of Umbria, the wheat's cellular structure changed at a quantum level, creating what the analysis software called photonic imprints. He didn't fully understand it, but he was beginning to suspect it mattered. On the 15th day of travel, Santos found him asleep at his workstation. She gently shook his shoulder. "We've got a problem." Zyx'thor's eyes opened one at a time. "What kind of problem?" "Captain's lost her shadow." He found Zyx'thor on the bridge, staring at her reflection in the viewport. The absence was stark. In the ship's bright lighting, she should have cast multiple shadows. Instead, there was nothing. "How long?" Zyx'thor asked. "Noticed it this morning," Zyx'thor said, her voice steady, but her remaining arms trembling slightly. "I've been eating standard rations. Probably should have listened when Santos suggested we buy some of your bread before we left. We have 3 weeks until we reach Umbria. I know the timeline. I know what happens." Zyx'thor thought quickly. "I have wheat. I have a portable oven in the cargo bay. If my theory is correct, I can bake bread that might help." "Might?" Zyx'thor asked. "It's all I have." Zyx'thor turned from the viewport. "Then we'd better hope might is enough."
Umbria appeared in the viewport like a jewel, its surface shimmering with the reflected light of its twin suns. One sun was yellow, old and stable. The other was younger, blue-white and fierce. Where their light intersected on the planet's surface, strange things happened. The meridian zone, as it was called, was a band that wrapped around Umbria's equator. Here, day and night existed simultaneously. One side of the zone bathed in yellow light, the other in blue. In the narrow strip where both met, the light mixed into shades that hurt to look at directly. As the distant prayer descended, Zyx'thor noticed something wrong. The cities were dark. Umbria had been colonized 3,000 years ago by the Lith Collective, an alliance of species who'd been drawn to the planet's unique properties. At its peak, 40 million beings had called this world home. The cities should have been visible from orbit, bright clusters against the Terminator zone. Instead, there was nothing. "Scanning," reported Santos from her station. "I'm reading structures, but no power signatures, no heat signatures either." "Life signs?" Zyx'thor asked. "Negative. The planet's deserted." They landed in what had been the capital city of Krell Shore. The architecture was beautiful, towers that seemed to twist the light around them, streets paved with reflective materials that created rivers of color. But it was all empty. Zyx'thor was the first to exit the ship, his feet touching umbral soil for the first time. The dual sunlight washed over him, and his 3 eyes struggled to adjust. The sensations were overwhelming. Every surface reflected light differently. The very air seemed to shimmer. And then he saw them. Shadows. Hundreds of thousands of shadows cast against walls and streets and buildings. Shadows of beings walking, working, living, but no beings to cast them. "By the void," whispered Santos behind him. "Where are the people?" Zyx'thor walked toward the nearest shadow. It moved. As he approached, it shifted position, as if turning to face him. The shadow of a Lith, tall and multi-limbed, performing some task that Zyx'thor couldn't identify. "They're not gone," he said quietly. "They're separated." Zyx'thor joined him, her 4 remaining arms crossed. "Separated from what?" "Their shadows, or maybe their bodies. I don't know which." He knelt down, examining the shadow more closely. "On this planet, with this specific light, shadows aren't just absences of light. They're something more."
He spent hours exploring, documenting, analyzing. The city's archives were still intact, powered by solar batteries that would last millennia. He downloaded everything he could find, reading through historical records at superhuman speed, his Valkyrie memory absorbing it all. And that's when he found it. A journal written by Vexandra, dated almost exactly 10,000 years ago. Zyx'thor read Vexandra's journal on the ship's bridge, with Zyx'thor and Santos looking over his shoulder. The captain's fading had slowed after eating his experimental bread, but it hadn't stopped. Her colors were duller now, her edges less distinct. The journal was terrifying. Day 1847 of the Great Observation Project, Zyx'thor read aloud. We have confirmed it. The universe undergoes a reset cycle every 10,000 standard years. The evidence is irrefutable. Cosmic background radiation shows patterns, quantum foam analysis reveals scars, and most damning of all, the archaeological record across hundreds of worlds shows simultaneous extinction events at precise intervals. Extinction events? Santos leaned closer. Zyx'thor continued. The cycle is not random. It is not natural disaster or cosmic accident. It is intentional. The universe itself has been programmed, designed, engineered to periodically erase conscious life and begin again. The mechanism is elegant in its cruelty. Beings lose their quantum signature, their fundamental connection to reality. First, the shadow, a three-dimensional expression of four-dimensional existence. Then the being itself, gradually phasing out of sync with space-time until they simply cease to have ever been. That's impossible, Zyx'thor said, but her voice lacked conviction. Is it? Zyx'thor scrolled further. Vexandra and her team discovered something else. Certain forms of energy can alter a being's quantum signature, specifically photonic energy, absorbed at precise wavelengths and stored in organic molecules. They called it resonance anchoring. By consuming matter that had been properly exposed to specific light frequencies, a being could temporarily reinforce their connection to reality, making them invisible to the reset mechanism. Santos pointed to a passage. There, she lists the foods. Umbral wheat is there. So are all the others we've been seeing in the reports. But why bread? Why this specific thing? Zyx'thor's third eye focused on a diagram in the journal. It's because baking isn't just cooking, it's transformation. The heat, the time, the chemical reactions, they don't just prepare the food, they lock in the photonic imprint, make it bioavailable. My master, Korveth, he knew this. He must have learned from someone who learned from someone, a chain of knowledge going back thousands of years. He read the final entry in Vexandra's journal, and his dual hearts froze. Day 2103, the cycle approaches. We estimate 300 days until activation. We have prepared as many as we can, taught them the recipes, the methods. But there are billions across the galaxy, and we are so few. I fear that knowledge alone will not be enough. Someone must warn the next cycle. Someone must find a way to transmit the information, to ensure it spreads far enough, fast enough. But how do you shout across 10,000 years? How do you make the dead speak to the living? The entry ended there.
Back in the cargo hold, Zyx'thor spread out his data across 3 holographic displays. The numbers told a story he didn't want to believe. The Shadow Plague had appeared simultaneously across the galaxy 3 months ago. Initial cases numbered in the thousands. Now, conservative estimates put the affected population at 4 billion. The progression was exponential. But worse, much worse, was what he'd calculated based on Vexandra's research and his own analysis. 87%, he said to the empty room. His voice echoed off the metal walls.
87% of the cycle is already complete. He pulled up a galactic map, thousands of inhabited worlds, hundreds of billions of conscious beings. He marked the ones where protective food sources were available. Then he calculated distribution networks, manufacturing capacity, the time needed to teach preparation methods. The math was brutal. Even if he broadcast the knowledge right now, even if every baker and chef and food synthesizer in the galaxy started immediately, they could maybe reach 8% of the population before the cycle completed. 92% of all conscious life in the galaxy would be erased. His hands shook. His three eyes couldn't focus on the displays anymore. The enormity of it crushed down on him like gravity from a collapsing star. There had to be another way. He thought about Vixandra's question, how do you shout across 10,000 years? And then it hit him. You don't shout across time, you shout across space, all of it at once. Zyx'thor ran to the bridge. Zyx'thor was at the controls, her form now noticeably translucent. Santos was trying to adjust something on a console, her movements jerky with barely controlled panic. "I need your ship," Zyx'thor said. Zyx'thor laughed weakly. "She's yours, for whatever good it'll do." The distant prayer has a stellar distress beacon, correct? Required by salvage law for all cargo vessels. Yes, but those only broadcast a few light years at most. What if we overloaded it? Every system at once. Engines, life support, everything except the beacon itself. Santos understood first. You'd get one pulse, one massive galaxy-spanning electromagnetic burst, but it would vaporize the ship and everything in it. I know. You couldn't carry much data in a single pulse. I don't need to carry much, just enough. Zyx'thor pulled up his research, began compressing it. The basics of resonance anchoring, the list of protective foods, the preparation methods. It's maybe 300 megabytes. The beacon could handle that. Zyx'thor turned in her chair. Most of her face was now translucent. Zyx'thor could see the stars through her skull. You understand what you're proposing. This ship is my life, everything I own. I know. And you'd die. The overload would take hours to set up. You wouldn't have time to escape. I know that too. Santos spoke quietly. Why you? Broadcast the data. Let someone else make the sacrifice. Because I'm already here. Because we're in umbral orbit, near the meridian zone where the signal will be strongest. And every hour we debate is thousands more dying. His three eyes met theirs. And because I'm a baker, this is what I do. I take raw ingredients and transform them into something that sustains life. This is just a larger recipe. They worked for 3 days straight. Santos knew her ship's systems intimately, and together they rewired everything, turning the distant prayer into a weapon of information. The cargo hold became Zyx'thor's final kitchen. He baked continuously, producing loaves of umbral wheat bread that he stored in stasis containers. Zyx'thor and Santos ate them hourly. The captain's fading slowed, stopped, even began to reverse slightly. Her shadow flickered in and out of existence, fighting to remain. On the final night, with the ship's modifications complete, the three of them sat in the galley and shared a meal. Zyx'thor had made his best bread, the recipe perfected over years of practice. He'd prepared other dishes too, combinations of protective foods he'd researched. The meal was strange, eclectic, a mix of cuisines from worlds light years apart. "You know," Zyx'thor said, her form now solid again, "I've been flying cargo for 40 years, seen most of the galaxy. Never thought I'd die in a bakery." Santos smiled, the first Zyx'thor had ever seen from her. Could be worse ways to go. Could be better ones, too. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Then Zyx'thor asked something he'd been wondering. "Why did you agree to this? You could have dropped me on Umbria and left, saved yourselves." Zyx'thor and Santos exchanged a look. "My daughter," the captain said finally. "She's on Kylath Prime, 4 years old by your calendar. If this works, if your broadcast reaches far enough, maybe she survives. Maybe she gets to grow up in a universe that isn't ending." Santos nodded. "My brother, my parents, friends I haven't spoken to in years but think about every day. Everyone we've ever met, everyone we've never met. They all deserve a chance." "Besides," Zyx'thor added, "what kind of story would it be if we just ran away? Pretty terrible one, if you ask me." Zyx'thor felt something in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the bread. "Thank you." "Don't thank us yet. This might not work." "It will work." "How can you be sure?" He thought about it, about Vexandra and her team desperately trying to save a galaxy 10,000 years ago, about his master, Corveth, passing down recipes he might not have fully understood, about Thalbeck's coming to his shop day after day for bread, about every customer, every meal, every small act of sustenance he'd ever provided. "Because someone has to believe it will," he said finally. "That's how anything worth doing gets done."
The process took 6 hours. Zyx'thor sat at the engineering console, watching the ship's systems slowly overload. The power readings climbed steadily, far beyond safe parameters. Warning lights flashed across every display. Automated safety systems screamed their protests before Santos manually disabled them. Zyx'thor and Santos had already evacuated on the emergency shuttle against Zyx'thor's protests. "We'll be fine," Zyx'thor had said. "We've got bread enough for months and a list of where to find more. Go save the galaxy, Baker." Now he was alone with his data and his ship and his choice. The beacon pulsed on standby, ready to release everything in one catastrophic burst. Zyx'thor had compressed his research into the tightest package possible, 300 megabytes of hope. The preparation methods for 47 different protective foods, the science behind resonance anchoring explained in layman's terms, locations of key ingredients, everything someone would need to understand and replicate what he'd learned. But as he sat there, watching the power levels climb, he realized something was missing. He pulled up a recording interface and began to speak. "My name is Zyx'thor of the Valkyrie. I am a baker. If you're receiving this message, your world is ending. Not through war or disaster, but through something much older. Every 10,000 years, the universe resets itself, erasing conscious life to start fresh. The process has already begun. You have maybe weeks, maybe less." He paused, organizing his thoughts. "I know what you're thinking. This is impossible. This is insane. Why should you trust the words of a stranger, broadcast across the void? You shouldn't, but you should trust your own eyes. Look around. People are losing their shadows. They're fading. Your scientists have no answers. Your leaders have no solutions. All you have is a choice. Do nothing and fade with everyone else, or try something that sounds impossible." The power levels hit 80%. The ship began to shudder. "The data includes everything you need, foods that can protect you, methods to prepare them. It works. I've seen it work. But there's not enough time to save everyone. There's barely enough time to save anyone. So you have to choose. Do you save yourself, your family, or do you take what you learn and spread it as far and as fast as you can?" 90%. The hull was heating up. Zyx'thor could smell metal beginning to burn. "I spent my life making bread. It's simple work, honest work. You take grain and water and heat and time, and you create something that sustains life. That's all any of us can really do. Take what we have, what we know, what we've learned, and transform it into something that helps someone else survive another day.
95%. The displays flickered, emergency lights activated. 10,000 years ago, someone tried to warn us. They failed, but they tried. Now I'm trying to warn you. Maybe I'll fail too. Maybe this message reaches nobody. Maybe it reaches everyone, but arrives too late. I don't know. All I know is that I have to try, because the alternative is sitting still while the universe erases everything I've ever cared about. 98%. The ship screamed, metal groaned, reality itself seemed to bend around the overloading systems. If you survive this, if you manage to find the ingredients and make the food and anchor yourself to reality, remember this: you didn't save yourself. We saved each other. Every person who shares this knowledge, every baker who learns these recipes, every parent who feeds their children, every stranger who helps another stranger, that's how consciousness fights back against the void, not with weapons or technology or gods, but with the simple act of caring enough to help someone else survive another day. 100%. The signal is transmitting now. By the time you receive this, I'll be gone. That's fine. I'm just a baker. But what I've learned, what I'm sharing, that's bigger than me. That's 10,000 years of knowledge compressed into a single desperate moment. Use it, spread it, save as many as you can. The ship's reactor reached critical mass. Zyx'thor felt the heat, saw the hull beginning to glow. And if you make it through, if you're one of the ones who survives the reset, do me something. Bake bread, real bread, from grain and water and time. Remember that someone once died to teach you how. Remember that the universe tried to erase us, and we fought back with recipes and ovens and the stubborn refusal to fade quietly. The light was blinding now. His skin felt like it was burning, but he kept talking. My master once told me that baking is an act of faith. You mix ingredients, apply heat, and trust that something greater will emerge. I'm applying that same faith now. I'm mixing knowledge and sacrifice and hope, and I'm trusting that somewhere, somehow, someone will receive this and know what to do with it. The ship's computer began a countdown. 10 seconds. This is Zyx'thor of the Valkyrie, baker of the Cosmic Loaf on station Calyx 9. To everyone who ever bought my bread, thank you. You gave my life purpose. To everyone receiving this message, good luck. You're going to need it. 5 seconds. And to the universe itself, to whatever ancient intelligence designed this cycle of death and rebirth, know this: you tried to erase us. You failed, because we're not just matter and energy. We're memory and knowledge and stubborn hope. We're the things we teach each other, the recipes we pass down, the simple act of feeding someone we care about. 3 seconds. That's stronger than any reset. That's eternal. 2 seconds. Now, get baking. 1.
The distant prayer detonated in a flash of light visible from 3 star systems away. The electromagnetic pulse that followed wasn't just energy, it was information, compressed and encoded, riding the wavefront of the explosion like a message in a bottle thrown into an infinite ocean. The signal spread at the speed of light, which meant it would take years to reach the far corners of the galaxy. But Zyx'thor had been clever. He'd included a recursive protocol. Any receiver that got the full message would automatically rebroadcast it, creating a chain reaction of information spreading faster than any single transmission could achieve. 3 hours after the distant prayer exploded, a research station in the Andros sector picked up the signal. The scientists there were skeptical at first, but with shadows disappearing all around them, they tried the recipes. They worked. 6 hours later, a colony ship received the transmission. They had a baker on board, an elderly human who'd been making sourdough for 50 years. He read Zyx'thor's message, compared it to his own methods, and understood. Within a day, he'd converted the ship's entire food production to protective recipes. 12 hours.
a military outpost, a university, a prison colony, a luxury station. Each one received, analyzed, tested, and confirmed. Each one began broadcasting their own confirmations, adding their own data, creating a growing network of survival. 24 hours. Millions had heard. Thousands of bakers, chefs, food technicians. Some dismissed it as a hoax. Others tried and succeeded. The knowledge spread like fire, jumping from world to world, station to station. 48 hours. Zyx'thor and Santos made it to the nearest inhabited system, a frontier world called Thresh. They brought physical samples of umbral wheat bread along with their testimony. The governor was skeptical until his own shadow started to fade. Then he became a believer. 1 week. The Senate of United Worlds, traditionally slow to act, called an emergency session. They authorized the immediate production and distribution of all protective foods. Resource limitations meant not everyone could be saved, but everyone would have access to the knowledge. 2 weeks. Thalbeck sat in his shop on station Calyx 9, eating a piece of bread he'd baked himself, using Zyx'thor's recipe. His shadow was solid again, dark and familiar. Around him, the station had transformed. Every food vendor had switched to protective preparations. Lines stretched around corridors as people waited for their daily rations. 3 weeks. A monastery on the 7th moon of Kryn added a new prayer to their daily rituals. They called it the Baker's Litany. It began, "We remember the one who gave everything so that we might have bread." 1 month. The first children started being born to parents who'd survived the shadow plague. Doctors noticed something strange. These infants had no shadows at all for the first few hours of life. Then, as they consumed their first meals, prepared according to the new protocols, their shadows bloomed into existence, as if the universe was welcoming them, acknowledging their right to exist. 3 months after Zyx'thor's sacrifice, Zyx'thor and Santos returned to Umbrea. They'd bought a new ship, smaller than the distant prayer, but fast and reliable. They landed in Krellshore's empty streets and walked among the shadows that still moved without bodies. But something had changed. The shadows were fading. As protective foods spread across the galaxy, as billions of beings anchored themselves to reality, the separated shadows of Umbrea were losing their definition. It was as if the reset cycle, denied its full harvest, was releasing its grip on the ones it had already taken. Santos knelt beside a fading shadow. "Do you think they're coming back?" "No," Zyx'thor said softly. "I think they're moving on. Wherever they were trapped between reality and erasure, they're being released." They found Vexandra's laboratory, preserved under layers of dust. The ancient Lith's final experiments were still laid out. 10,000 years of waiting finally ended. Zyx'thor touched one of the workstations, and a holographic display flickered to life. It showed a message programmed to activate when certain conditions were met. Vexandra's image appeared, tall and multi-limbed, her expression weary but determined. If you're seeing this, it means someone survived. Someone found the knowledge, used it, spread it. The cycle has been cheated, at least partially. She paused. "We tried to do this. We failed. But we left breadcrumbs, recipes, traditions. We hoped that 10,000 years later, someone would connect the dots. Someone would be brave enough, or desperate enough, or stubborn enough to fight back." The hologram walked closer, as if seeing through time. "To whoever saved them, whoever gave their life so others could live, know this: you are not the first. Every cycle someone tries, every 10,000 years, the bravest and most foolish among us stand against the erasure. Most fail completely. Some, like us, fail partially, but each time we learn. We leave better clues. We encode the knowledge deeper into culture, into tradition, into the simple recipes that parents teach children. Bexandra's image smiled sadly. The ones who designed the reset cycle, whoever they were, whatever they were, they made one mistake. They assumed knowledge would die with its keepers. They didn't account for bread, for songs, for stories passed from one generation to the next. They didn't understand that consciousness isn't just individual, it's collective. Every time we teach someone to bake, to cook, to prepare food with care, we're encoding survival into the fabric of culture itself. The image began to fade. Sleep well, baker. Your name will be remembered, and 10,000 years from now, when the next cycle begins, someone will find your message. Someone will connect the dots again, and the chain will continue, unbroken, until the day we finally defeat this thing entirely. The display went dark. Zyx'thor and Santos stood in silence for a long moment. Then Santos spoke. "We should build something here, a monument." "No," Zyx'thor said, "not a monument, a school."
5 years later. The Umbrian Culinary Institute occupied the restored buildings of Krelshore. Students from across the galaxy came to learn not just cooking, but the science behind resonance anchoring. They studied in the same laboratories where Vexandra had worked. They practiced in kitchens built according to ancient specifications. And at the center of the campus stood a simple bakery, its sign reading, "The Cosmic Loaf" in a dozen languages. Zyx'thor ran the institute. Her shadow was solid now, permanent, as were those of the billions who'd survived the shadow plague. The reset cycle had completed its countdown 5 years ago, but instead of erasing 92% of galactic civilization, it had managed only 38%. 38% was still catastrophic. Entire worlds had been lost, species had gone extinct, but 62% had survived, and that 62% remembered why. Santos taught the engineering courses, showing students how to build proper full-spectrum ovens, how to create the light conditions necessary for true protective food. Her classes were always full. And in the bakery, working the ovens every day, was Thalbeck's. The Greenwich merchant had given up trading to become a baker. He'd studied Zyx'thor's techniques obsessively, practiced until his forearms could knead dough with perfect precision. Now he taught apprentices, passing on what he'd learned. On the 5-year anniversary of Zyx'thor's sacrifice, the Institute held a ceremony. Thousands attended, either in person or via holographic link. Representatives from hundreds of worlds. Survivors who'd eaten their first protective meal in the dark days of the plague. Children born after, who'd grown up in a galaxy that knew how close it had come to ending. Zyx'thor stood at a podium in the main courtyard, looking out at the crowd. 5 years ago, a baker made bread. It's a simple thing to say. Bakers make bread every day, have made bread for millennia across countless worlds. But this baker, Zyx'thor of the Velkari, he made bread that saved the galaxy. She paused, letting the words settle. We gather here not to mourn what we lost, though the losses were immense. We gather to remember what we kept. 62% of galactic civilization survived because one person refused to accept extinction, because one person believed that knowledge, properly shared, could defeat even the universe itself. A display activated behind her, showing Zyx'thor's face. 3 eyes, blue skin, the slight flour dust that always seemed to be on his apron. The image was from security footage from Station Calyx 9, taken a week before his final journey. He was not a warrior, he was not a scientist, he was not a leader or a hero in any traditional sense. He was a baker who cared about his customers and his craft. And when the universe tried to erase us, he responded the only way he knew how, by making sure everyone had enough to eat. Thalbeck stepped forward, carrying a loaf of bread on a ceremonial platter. It was made from umbral wheat, baked according to the exact specifications Zyx'thor had used. The crust was golden brown, the interior perfectly aerated, the smell rich and complex. This bread is identical to what Zyx'thor made. Same ingredients, same method, same light exposure. But it's not his bread. It never can be. Because what made his bread special wasn't the recipe. It was the intention, the care, the understanding that every loaf he baked was sustaining not just a body, but a life, a story, a connection between people. He broke the loaf in half. Steam rose in the dual sunlight. We've trained 10,000 bakers in the last 5 years. They work on every inhabited world, in every major settlement. They make protective foods according to proper methods. But we've also taught them something else. We've taught them that baking is an act of resistance. Every time you feed someone, you're saying to the universe, this person matters. This life has value. This consciousness deserves to exist. He distributed pieces of the bread to people in the front rows. They passed the pieces back, sharing them until everyone in the courtyard held a small portion. In 10,000 years, the cycle will try again. We know this now. We can't stop it, can't prevent it, but we can prepare. We can encode this knowledge so deeply into our cultures that it becomes instinct. We can make sure that every parent teaches their child, every master teaches their apprentice, every generation passes to the next the simple truth. Bread saves lives. Zyx'thor raised her piece of bread. To Zyx'thor, baker of the cosmic loaf, may his memory be eternal. May his memory be eternal, the crowd echoed. They ate together. Thousands of beings from hundreds of species, all consuming bread made by the sacrifice of one who'd believed in tomorrow. Far across the galaxy, on a small agricultural world called Harvest Prime, a young girl named Liz helped her mother in the kitchen. They were making bread, the same bread they made every week. "Why do we always use the special oven?" Liz asked, watching the full-spectrum lights activate. Her mother, a human named Chen, smiled. "Because this isn't just bread. It's memory. It's protection. It's a promise." "A promise to who?" "To someone you'll never meet. Someone who died so you could be born." Chen began measuring ingredients with practiced precision. 10,000 years ago, give or take a few centuries, the universe tried to erase all conscious life. It almost succeeded, but people fought back. They learned, they shared, they sacrificed. Liz poured water into the mixing bowl. "Like the baker?" "Like the baker, Zyx'thor. He figured out what was happening and how to stop it, but he couldn't save everyone himself. So he gave everything he had, everything he was, to make sure the knowledge would spread far enough to matter." "That's sad." "It is, but it's also beautiful. Because he didn't have to do it. He could have saved himself, found somewhere to hide, waited for the cycle to end. Instead, he chose to help others, even knowing he'd die in the process." They kneaded the dough together, 4 hands working in rhythm. "Mom, will it happen again?" Chen paused, then decided on honesty. "Yes, in 10,000 years, the cycle will restart. The universe will try to erase us again." "Will we be ready?" "I don't know, sweetie, but I know we'll try. Every loaf of bread we make, every person we teach, every child we raise with this knowledge, it's all practice, it's all preparation. 10,000 years is a long time, but it's not forever. And when the cycle comes again, someone like Zyx'thor will stand up. Someone always does." Liz thought about this while they worked. Finally, she asked, "What if I want to be a baker when I grow up?" Chen looked at her daughter, seeing determination in eyes too young to fully understand what they were committing to. "Then I'll teach you everything I know, and you'll teach your children, and they'll teach theirs. And maybe 10,000 years from now, when the next cycle begins, it'll be one of your descendants who figures out how to stop it permanently." "That's a lot of responsibility." "It is, but you know what? It's also simple.
You just have to care. Care about the people you feed. Care about passing on what you've learned. Care enough to try, even when trying seems impossible. They placed the dough in the oven. The full-spectrum lights created rainbows in the kitchen. Liz watched the bread begin to rise, thinking about cycles and sacrifice and the strange responsibility of being alive in a universe that periodically tried to delete you. "Mom?" "Yes?" "I think I'd like to be a baker when I grow up." Chen hugged her daughter. "Then you'll be a great one, I can already tell." Somewhere in the vast archives of the galactic network, Zyx'thor's original transmission still existed, preserved and protected by 1,000 redundant systems. Occasionally, someone would access it, usually students studying the shadow plague or historians researching the reset cycle. But most people encountered the message differently. They encountered it in the bread. Every baker who trained in the proper methods, who learned the science of resonance anchoring and the art of protective cooking, they also learned the story. It was part of the curriculum, inseparable from the technique. You couldn't learn to make the bread without learning why it mattered. And so the knowledge spread, not just as data, but as culture, as tradition, as the kind of deep understanding that transcends simple information and becomes part of how a society sees itself. Children grew up knowing that bread was special, that it wasn't just food, but a shield against oblivion, that somewhere in their past, someone they'd never met had died to give them this gift. Some became bakers, others became scientists trying to understand the reset cycle more fully. Still others became activists, working to ensure the knowledge never faded, never became forgotten or taken for granted. And once every year, on the anniversary of the distant prayer's destruction, billions across the galaxy would pause in their daily routines. They would eat bread together. They would remember. They would say the name, Zyx'thor. And in saying it, in remembering him, in continuing to bake and to teach and to care, they kept him alive in the only way that truly mattered, not as a person, but as an idea. The idea that one life, properly spent, could echo across time and space and death itself. The universe had tried to erase them. It had failed. And 10,000 years from now, when the cycle tried again, it would fail again. Because the knowledge was too deep now, the culture too strong, the simple act of making bread too thoroughly woven into the fabric of galactic civilization. Zyx'thor had been right about one thing. Baking was an act of faith. You mixed ingredients, applied heat, and trusted that something greater would emerge. He mixed knowledge and sacrifice and hope. And what emerged was a galaxy that refused to be forgotten, that refused to fade quietly, that would continue, loaf by loaf, generation by generation, to bake its way to tomorrow.